"The plain one will do," said the Duke of Doncaster, and the drawing-room went so still that the fire's crack sounded like a pistol shot. He did not trouble to look at the women arranged before him. He had been looking at them for the better part of an hour, and an hour of being looked at himself, appraised like a stallion at a country fair, had burned the last civility out of him. Horatio Vance, 9th Duke of Doncaster, master of 11,000 acres and a name older than the county road, stood with his back to the tall windows and his hands clasped behind him, and repeated the sentence in a voice that had frozen better rooms than this one. "The plain one. In the grey. She will do." Lady Sabra Ives laughed, a bright chipped sound. "Your Grace is pleased to jest." "I am never pleased," he said, "and I do not jest." There were 4 young women in the room, and 3 of them were dressed as if for a coronation. Lady Sabra's own daughter, Coralie, stood nearest the hearth in ivory sawn with seed pearls, her chin lifted at the exact angle her mother had doubtless spent a month perfecting. Beside her were the Mrs. Hallam sisters, both in blush pink, both smiling as though smiling were an errand they had been sent on. They had been brought to Doncaster Hall on a pretext so thin it was practically a window pane, a matter of a subscription for the parish roof. And the Duke had let them come, because his solicitor had told him plainly what the alternative was, and he had wished to see for himself how low the world would stoop. Lower was the answer, always lower. The 4th woman stood apart by the door, half in the shadow of the great oak press, in a gown of grey stuff that had been turned at least once. Her head was covered. Not a bonnet, a hood, deep and plain, of the sort a woman wore to walk to church in the rain, and she wore it indoors, drawn well all forward, so that of her face he could see nothing but the line of a jaw and the shape of a mouth that was not smiling. She had not once moved since she came in. She had not once tried to be seen. She was, in short, the only honest thing in the room, and he had chosen her for that reason, and to be cruel. "Your Grace," said Lady Sabra, recovering, she is not one of the party. She is my companion, my poor cousin's girl. She carries my shawl." "Then she has a use," said Doncaster, "which is more than I can say for the rest of you." Coralie Ives made a small wounded sound. The Mrs. Hallam turned pink to match their gowns. And still the hooded woman by the door did not move, and it occurred to the Duke, with a flicker of something that was not quite shame, that a well-bred creature would have flinched, and that she had not. "You are angry," Lady Sabra said, gathering herself with the resilience of a woman who had buried 2 husbands and profited by both. "It is understood. The terms of the late Duke's settlement are cruel. To be told a man must marry before Michaelmas or see his father's house go to a cousin he despises." "You have been reading my correspondence," Doncaster said pleasantly, "or my solicitor has been drinking. Either way it is a matter I shall attend to." "Yes, madam." "I must marry, and I must marry within 7 weeks, and every mother in 3 counties has smelled it out as a crow smells a battlefield. You are simply the first to arrive, and so you insult us. So I choose." He turned then at last and looked at the door. "You, in the hood, come here." The room turned with him. The grey woman came forward, not quickly, not slowly. She stopped at a proper distance and made a curtsy that was, he noted, correct to the inch, the kind of curtsy that is taught early by someone who cares, and never afterward forgotten. "Your name?" "Elspeth, Your Grace." Her voice was low and unhurried, and it did something to the room. It was not a servant's voice. "Elspeth what?" A pause. It was very slight. "Danvers, Your Grace." "Look at me." "I would rather not, Your Grace." Behind her, Lady Sabra said quickly, "The poor creature is disfigured. A fire some years ago. It is a kindness to let her cover herself. I have always said so." "Have I not always said so, Coralie?" "Always, Mamma," said Coralie in the voice of a girl reciting a lesson. The Duke did not take his eyes from the hood. "Are you disfigured, Miss Danvers?" Another pause. "I am dismissed, Your Grace," she said, which the world finds a great deal easier to look at. Nobody in the room breathed. Lady Sabra's face had gone the colour of tallow. "You are impertinent," said Doncaster. "You asked me a question, Your Grace, and there was no polite answer to it. I gave you the true one instead. I am sorry if it was not the one you wanted." And she curtsied again and stepped back toward the door, back toward her shadow, as though the matter were finished and she had no expectation whatever of being wanted for anything. He heard himself say it before he had decided to. "Stay where you are." She stopped. "Lady Sabra." He did not raise his voice. He never had to. I am told a duke must marry, and marriage, I am reliably informed, requires a woman. You have brought me 4. I have taken 1. I would have thought you would be glad to be relieved of an expense. She is nobody, Lady Sabra said, and the words came out too fast, too high. She has no portion, no connections, no name to speak of. Excellent, said the Duke. Then no one will ask me for anything. Your Grace, you will leave her here. Her boxes may follow. If she has no boxes, my housekeeper will see to it. He walked to the bell rope and pulled it, and the sound of it went away down through the house like a stone down a well. I shall not be at home to callers for 7 weeks. Good day. They went. Coralie went weeping, and the Mrs. Hallam went whispering, and Lady Sabra went last. And at the door she turned and looked at the hooded woman, and the look was not the look of a mistress losing a companion. It was the look of a gaoler whose prisoner has gone out through a wall. Doncaster saw it. He filed it away where he filed everything, and told himself he did not care. When the carriage wheels had faded, he stood a long while at the window with his hands behind his back. Rain had begun over the park, the fine grey rain of late August that comes in from the west and takes 3 days to leave. Somewhere below, a gardener was running for the glasshouse with a sack over his head. "You have not thanked me," he said. "No, Your Grace. Most women in your position would." "Most women in my position," said the low, unhurried voice, "would first wish to know what position they are in." He turned around. She had put back her hood. Only a little, only enough to free her face from the deepest shadow, and the room was grey with rain light, and she stood feet from him, and afterwards he could never account for why he did not simply look. Perhaps because she had made a small movement as she did it, a movement of her hand toward her cheek, half shielding not vanity, he thought, but the reflex of a creature that has been struck at. He looked at her hands instead. They were not a servant's hands, though they had done work. They were long and fine, and there was an old callus on the right forefinger, in the place where a pen sits when a person writes for hours together. "There is no fire scar," he said. "No, Your Grace." "Then why the hood?" "Because Lady Sabra Ives finds me easier to explain covered than uncovered," she said, "and because for 6 years it has been safer to be plain." "Safer? From whom?" She said nothing at all. Miss Danvers. He came a step closer, and she did not retreat, and he noticed that too. "I have just told a woman of consequence, in front of witnesses, that I intend to marry her charity companion. I did it to wound her. I am not a good man, and I will not pretend to you that I am. But I do not lie, and having said it, I will do it, and therefore I will have the truth of you now in this room, or you will go back into that woman's carriage, and I will find somebody else." The rain ticked on the glass. "You said I was plain," she said. "You did not look at me." "No," he admitted. "I did not." "Then, Your Grace," she said, and for the first time something moved in her voice, something that was almost, but not quite, amusement. "You and Lady Sabra are in perfect agreement about me, and you have arrived at it by exactly the same method." He should have been furious. He was aware in the cold clerk's corner of his mind that kept the accounts of his own temper that he ought to be furious. Instead, he found that his jaw had unset itself, and that his heart was beating rather harder than the situation warranted, and that he wanted, quite badly, quite suddenly, and for no reason he could name, for the rain to stop and the sun to come through the west windows and fall on the place where she was standing. "Mrs. Corbett will show you to the blue rooms," he said at last stiffly. "You will dine at 8. You will not be required to speak. I am very much obliged, Your Grace, and Miss Danvers." He was at the door. He did not turn. "Whatever it is you are hiding, whoever it is you are hiding from while you are under this roof, you are under my protection. Do you understand me? Nothing comes into this house that I do not let in." There was a silence behind him, then, very quietly, "That is the first time in 6 years that anyone has said such a thing to me. I find I do not know what to do with it." "Keep it," said the Duke of Doncaster, and went out. He did not sleep well. He told himself it was the rain. In the morning he rode the home farm with his agent, and looked at a broken sluice, and said yes and no in the right places, and did not hear a word of it. He was thinking about a curtsy correct to the inch. He was thinking about a callus in the place where a pen sits. And he was thinking, he, who had spent 39 years cultivating an indifference so complete that the county had made a legend of it, that he had said the plain one will do, and that the words had been a stone thrown at a window, and that he had not the least idea yet what he had broken. She did not stay quiet, and he found he had not really wanted her to. The first week she kept to the blue rooms and the West Library, and the household, which had spent 9 years learning to move around its master like water around a rock, discovered that there was now a second current in the house. Mrs. Corbett reported, with her mouth pursed to hide her approval, that Miss Danvers had mended the torn leaf of the great atlas herself, with paste and a linen strip, rather than let it be thrown out. The under-gardener reported that Miss Danvers had asked the name of every plant in the long border and had got them right the second time. And Bramwell, his solicitor, who came out from town on the Thursday with a face like a rained-on funeral, reported nothing at all, because he was too busy staring. That, Bramwell said, is your intended? Across the hall at the foot of the stairs, the grey figure in the hood was speaking to a footman about a chimney that smoked. That is my intended. Your Grace. Bramwell set down his case. He was 60 and had served the Duke's father and had earned, over the years, the right to be a nuisance. There is a settlement to draw. I must have her full name, her parish, her parents, her age. I must have something. The church will require it if I do not. Ask her. I did ask her, Your Grace, this morning in the hall. She said, and I quote the lady exactly, Mr. Bramwell, I will give you every particular you require on the day the banns are read and not 1 hour before. And you may tell the Duke that I said so, and that I am not ashamed of a single one of them. He blinked. I have never in 40 years been refused so agreeably. Doncaster discovered that he was smiling and stopped. He began that week to invent reasons. There was the matter of the East Coppice, which required a second opinion, and Miss Danvers had a good eye for timber, having, she said, grown up among trees. There was the matter of the tenant's accounts, which his agent kept in a hand like a spider's death throes, and which Miss Danvers, given an afternoon and a pot of ink, returned to him in columns so clean he could read the whole estate at a glance. There was the matter of the rain, which stopped on the Friday, and the matter of the terrace, which was dry by 4 o'clock, and the matter of a duke who had not walked on his own terrace for pleasure since his father died, and now walked it daily at that hour because a woman in a grey gown did. You write a very fine hand, he said, on the third of these walks. I was taught by a man who believed that a slovenly letter was a form of lying, she said. He used to say that if you would not say a thing clearly, it was because you did not mean it clearly. A tutor? My father. It was the first fact she had given him. He held it carefully the way one holds a bird. He is dead, a duke said. 6 years. Ah, the gravel went on under their feet. And your mother? The same night. He stopped walking. She went on 2 paces before she felt it, and turned, and the hood turned with her, and the low sun came sideways across the terrace and lit the underside of it, and he saw, for a half-second, no more mouth, and a cheekbone, and the edge of an eye, grey-green, looking straight at him. You need not be gentle with me about it, Your Grace, she said. It was long ago, and I have carried it a great while. What I cannot bear is being pitied by people who never knew them. I was not going to pity you, said Doncaster. I was going to say that I know precisely how it is done. One puts it in a room and one shuts the door, and one walks the door for the rest of one's life, and every so often one hears something move inside. Silence. The rooks went over going home. Yes, she said. That is exactly how it is done. My father died in the middle of a quarrel with me, he said, and was astonished to hear himself say it. We were arguing about a lease. 40 shillings a year and the future of a family, and I was right, and I was proving I was right, and he put his hand on the table and sat down and did not get up again, and so I am a man who won an argument. He looked at the park. The county calls me cold. The county is very nearly correct. I have been cold since I was 30, because when I am not cold I am that, and I would rather be a rock than a wound. He had never said it. Not to Bramwell, not to his mother, not aloud, not once. You are not a rock, said Elspeth Danvers. No. A rock does not choose the hooded woman in the corner in order to spite a room. A rock does not send his own physician to a cottage in the middle of the night because a carter's wife has a fever. Yes, I know of it. The kitchen knows everything, and I have made friends of the kitchen. A rock does not stand on his terrace at 4 o'clock every day of the week. She let that sit exactly long enough. A rock, Your Grace, is simply cold. You are a man who has decided to be, which is a different thing, and much harder work, and I think you must be very tired. Nobody had spoken to him like that since he was 19. he said roughly. Take off the hood. No, Elspeth. It was the first time he had used it. He heard the change in her breath. If I take it off, she said, I must tell you everything, and then you will have to decide something, and I have been safe here for 11 days, and I should like— Her voice went and steadied and came back. I should like to be safe for a few more. That is all. It is a very small greed. You are afraid of Lady Sabra Ives. I am afraid of what she will do when she understands that she has lost me. She cannot touch you here. Your Grace, said Elspeth, you do not yet know what she has. He went to London the next morning. He told the household it was business. It was. He saw Bramwell, and he set that patient, dogged old man to work with 3 words. Danvers, 6 years, and he came back on the 4th day with the taste of the city in his mouth, and an unease in him he could not put down. The house met him with candles and the smell of rain again, and Mrs. Corbett met him in the hall with her hands folded and her face white. She's had a caller, Your Grace. I left instructions. The lady would not be kept out. She said she was the young person's guardian and that there was law in it. Mrs. Corbett's chin trembled with rage. 2 hours, Your Grace, in the Yellow Saloon, and when she'd gone Miss Danvers came out and she was steady, Your Grace. She's always steady, but she'd bitten her lip through. He found her in the West Library in the dark with no candle lit. You will tell me now, said the Duke of Doncaster, and shut the door. For a long moment she did not speak. Then she reached up with both hands and put back the hood, and let it fall to her shoulders. There was only the fire, and it was low. It was not, in the end, a great illumination. It was enough. Her hair was dark and heavy and badly pinned, as though it had been done by a woman with no glass and no time. Her face was pale and thin at the temple, and there was a mark on her lower lip where her teeth had been. And she was Doncaster, who had been to court, who had seen the season's beauties paraded for 20 years like plate at a banquet, stood in his own library with his hand still on the door knob, and could not, for a moment, do anything at all. She was beautiful, not prettily. Not in the small, hard, correct way of Coralie Ives. She was beautiful the way a landscape is beautiful, all one thing, cheek and brow and the grave grey-green eyes and the unhappy mouth, and the whole of it lit from behind by something that had been through a fire and not been consumed. There, she said, now you have looked at me, Elspeth. She held up a hand, and it shook, and she looked at it with disgust and put it down. Please, whatever you are about to say, every man who has ever seen this face has said something, and none of it was ever meant for me. It was meant for the face, that is why I cover it. That is the whole of the reason, and it is a stupid, vain, wicked reason, and I am not sorry for it, because for 6 years it has been the only fence I had. Sit down, he said gently, and she did all at once, as though the strings had been cut. He crouched by the fire and built it up himself, because he did not trust his own face just then, and when it was burning he sat down across from her and said, Now, Lady Sabra, and she told him. Her father had been Gerard Danvers, and Gerard Danvers had been the last Earl of Ravensmere, a small, ancient, unfashionable earldom in the north with a house too big for its rents, and 1 daughter, and a great many books. There had been a fire, 6 years ago in November, a chimney fault, a dry autumn, a wing that went up like a rick. Her father had gone back in for her mother, neither had come out. And Elspeth, who had been dragged from a window by a groom, had woken up 3 days later in the house of her father's cousin's widow, Sabra Ives, with her hair burned short, her hands bandaged, and no living relation in the world. She was very kind, Elspeth said, for about a fortnight. The rest came in a flat, careful voice, and every sentence of it landed in the Duke like a stone into deep water. There had been a will. There had been a settlement of the Ravensmere lands upon the daughter, entailed to her and to her heirs, some 4,000 a year, which was a fortune in that country, and there had been a girl of 19 with burned hands who could not read the papers put before her, and a cousin's widow who had wept over her and administered for her and, within the year, had begun to say, first in private, then in public, then everywhere, that the poor creature had been dreadfully marked by the fire, that she was simple, that she was not fit to be seen, that it was a Christian duty to keep her quietly. She keeps me hooded, Elspeth said, because a marked woman cannot be married, and an unmarried woman must have a guardian, and a guardian must have the handling of the money. That is the whole of the machinery. It is not even clever. It is only patient. And you said nothing. For 6 years you said nothing? To whom? She said, and looked at him, and he had no answer. "Your Grace, I am a girl with no money of my own and no name that anyone in the South has heard, standing against a woman with a carriage and a lawyer and a reputation for charity. I tried. Twice. The first time she turned me out to sleep in a hayloft in February and I came back because I did not want to die. The second time, she speth. The second time, she said, she showed me my mother's letters. She has them. All of them and my father's, and the parish book from Ravensmere that has my baptism in it, and the ring my mother wore, which is the only thing in the world that would prove to a court who I am. She keeps them in a box, and she showed me the box, and she said it very kindly. She is always kind when she is at her worst. She said, Elspeth, my love, without these you are nobody at all, and nobody may be turned away at any door in England. The fire cracked. And today, said Doncaster, today she came here. What did she want? You, said Elspeth simply. Me, she wants the marriage. Elspeth's mouth twisted. Not to me, she came to offer terms. If you will send me back quietly and take Coralie instead, she will forget the insult and say nothing of it in town. And if you will not, she raised her eyes to his. Then on the night of the marchant ball, where all the world will be, and where you must appear with your intended or be laughed out of the county, she will stand up in that room and swear before every soul in it that the woman on your arm is a runaway servant, a lunatic, an impostor who has stolen a dead earl's daughter's name, and she will produce the box. And the box will be empty of everything but what she chooses to put in it. Doncaster rose. He walked to the window and stood, and put his hands behind his back, and looked out at nothing at all, and in the black glass he saw himself, a tall, cold man who had spent his life making certain that nothing on this earth could reach him. Very well, he said. Your Grace. Very well, said the Duke of Doncaster, and turned around, and she saw his face and rose to her feet. You will go to the marchant ball. You will go on my arm. You will wear the hood, exactly as she expects, and you will say nothing to anyone, and you will let that woman walk out into the middle of the floor and open her mouth. You cannot ask me. I am not asking, he said. I am asking you to trust me for 8 days, which I know is a great deal more than I have earned, and I am telling you that when you take off that hood in that room, you will not be doing it alone. She stared at him. What are you going to do? She whispered. I am going, said Doncaster, to be very, very cold. The marchant ball was the last great crush of the season, and half the county had come out to see the Duke of Doncaster's mistake. They had heard, of course. The Mrs. Hallam had wept prettily into a great many teacups, and Lady Sabra Ives had gone about with the wounded dignity of a woman too well bred to say what she knew, and therefore said it to every one, that the Duke had taken up a servant, that the creature was hooded and hidden and horrible, that it was a scandal and a pity, and this last always with a sigh, that a man of his temper had always been a little unsound. He walked in with her at 10:30, and the music faltered. She was on his arm in grey. He had offered her silk and she had refused it. She had asked instead for her own gown, brushed and pressed, and the hood upon her head, and she had said, if we are to do this thing, let it be done from the place where they put me. So they came down the great stair into all that light. 300 candles in the marchant chandeliers, and the crystal throwing it back in splinters. A duke in black with a face like the north wall of a church, and a small grey hooded woman with her hand resting on his sleeve as lightly as a bird. The whispering came up around them like water. Steady, he said, without moving his lips. I am perfectly steady, Your Grace, she murmured. It is your arm that is shaking. It was two, he had not known that. Lady Sabra Ives waited until the second set. She had chosen her moment as an artist chooses a colour. The floor cleared, the music paused. Old Lord Marchant himself, standing not 10 feet off, and the whole room turned toward the Duke of Doncaster, because the whole room had been turned toward him all night. She came out into the open floor in violet satin, and she was smiling, and she raised her voice so that every corner of that hall could hear it, and she said, Your Grace, forgive me. I can be silent no longer. It is a Christian duty. Doncaster said nothing at all. That woman, said Lady Sabra, and pointed with a fan, is not what she has told you she is. She is no gentlewoman. She is a servant of mine who ran from my house, a poor mad creature I sheltered out of charity, who has filled her head with a dead earl's daughter, and now goes about the country claiming to be her. She turned in a slow circle, taking in the room, taking her time. She was very good at it. The true Miss Danvers of Ravensmere died in the fire 6 years since, with her mother and father, God rest them. I know him. And this impostor, has fastened herself upon the noblest gentleman in this county, and if there is any justice she will be taken up tonight. The gasp went round the room like wind through barley, and the Duke of Doncaster turned his head and looked down at the woman his arm and said, quite clearly in the silence, Elspeth, if you would. She put back the hood. Afterwards, no one in that room agreed about what happened first. Some said it was Lady Marchant who cried out. Some said it was a young man near the orchestra who dropped a glass. What every soul in the place agreed upon, for 20 years afterwards, in every drawing room in 3 counties was the sound, a great indrawn breath, 300 people at once, as though the ballroom itself had been struck. The candlelight fell on her full, on the heavy dark hair. Dressed now, Mrs. Corbett had wept over it for an hour, on the pale grave face, on the grey-green eyes, level and unafraid, on a woman so unmistakably, so quietly, so ruinously beautiful that a duchess in the front rank said out loud, without knowing she spoke, "Oh, my dear lord." Lady Sabra Ives had gone the colour of ash. "You will observe," said Doncaster, and his voice went out over the room like the cold that comes off a lake, "that she is not marked. You will observe that she is not mad. You will observe, madam, that you have just sworn before 300 witnesses that this face was burned away 6 years ago, and it is here, and it is looking at you." She, Lady Sabra's fan, had begun to shake. "She is an impostor. There is no proof. There is no paper in England." "Mr. Bramwell," said the Duke. The crowd parted. A small, dogged, rained-on old man in a black coat came through it, and he was not alone. Behind him walked a heavy, grey-headed woman in a decent bonnet, who took one look at the woman standing beside the Duke and burst into tears, and behind her, a clergyman of 70 with a parish register under his arm. "Nurse Alice Pike," said Bramwell, who had the care of Lady Elspeth Danvers from her birth until she was 14, and who has been living these 6 years in a cottage at Doncaster's expense since the 22nd of last month, when I found her. He turned a page. "The Reverend Mr. Hode, of Ravensmere Parish, who baptized her, and who has brought the register, in which the entry is not a copy and is not disputed, and this," he held up his hand, "something small and gold-turned in the chandelier light, is Lady Ravensmere's ring, which was taken from her daughter while she lay insensible with her hands burned, and which was sold in the town of Marchby 4 years ago to a jeweller named Crail, who has kept his books and his memory, and who will swear to the lady who sold it." Bramwell's small eyes came up and rested on Lady Sabra Ives with the mildness of a man closing a trap. He describes her, madam, as remarkably handsome and given to violet. Nobody moved. "You have been receiving the rents of Ravensmere for 6 years, said Doncaster. "As guardian of a girl you told the world was an idiot while she carried your shawl. There is a name for that in law. Mr. Bramwell will be delighted to tell it to you at length, in a room with a magistrate in it." Lady Sabra Ives opened her mouth. Whatever was in it, it did not come out. She turned, with the last of her ruined grandeur, and walked the length of the ballroom, and the crowd fell back from her on both sides as though she were carrying something contagious, and her daughter Coralie, who had begun by being appalled, and who was after all only 19, did not follow her at once, but stood a moment, staring at Elspeth with her hand at her throat before she went. The doors closed. The room was one enormous held breath. And the Duke of Doncaster, who had planned every step of that evening for 8 days, discovered that he had planned nothing whatever beyond it. He turned. 300 people were watching. He did not see them. "Elspeth, your Grace, you are the Countess of Ravensmere in your own right." His voice was not working properly. "You have 4,000 a year, and a house, and a name older than mine, and there is not a man in this room who would not be at your door by Tuesday. You are free." He made himself say it. "You are free of her, and you are free of me. I chose you in this manner. I said a thing in a room to be cruel to other people, and you have paid for it in fear for 8 days, and I will not have you bound to me by a debt. So it is finished. You owe me nothing." The silence stretched. "That," said Elspeth Danvers, "is the coldest speech I have ever heard in my life. I am aware, and a lie from beginning to end." "Yes," said the Duke of Doncaster hoarsely, "it is." She looked up at him. And in front of the marchant chandeliers and the assembled quality of 3 counties, the last Countess of Ravensmere put her hand out and laid it flat against the black lapel of his coat, over his heart, where everyone could see it. "You said the plain one would do," she said. "And then you walked your terrace at 4 o'clock for 11 days so that I would not have to walk it alone. You sent an old man to find an old woman in a cottage 200 miles away, and you never once told me you had done it, 'cause you did not want me to hope until you were certain. You stood beside me tonight and let that woman say those things about me, and you never took your hand off mine." Her chin came up, it shook, and she did not care. "I do not want the house. I do not want the 4,000 a year. It may to the tenants, and it shall, and you may argue about the lease with me instead. I want the man who is standing on his own terrace in the rain at 4 o'clock, and I have wanted him for a fortnight, and I have been very much afraid that he was too cold to want anything back. Elspeth, so ask me again," she said, "and this time, look at me." He looked at her. He looked at her for so long, in front of all those people, that Lady Marchant afterwards swore she had had time to send for her salts, and what the county saw, the county that had called him a rock, and unsound and cold since he was 30, was the Duke of Doncaster's face coming apart. Quite slowly, like ice going off a river in the spring. "Marry me," he said. "Not the plain one, not the one who will do." He took her hand off his coat and held it in both of his as if it were the only warm thing in the world. "You. Marry me, and I will spend what is left of my life being ashamed of the sentence that brought you to me and grateful for it, in about equal measure every single day." "Yes," said Elspeth. The ballroom broke. It broke like a dam, 300 people all speaking at once, and somebody's aunt applauding, and the orchestra, which had been waiting for a signal for a quarter of an hour and had lost its nerve entirely, striking up a country dance in a key that suited nobody. He did not hear it. He had bent his head and put his forehead against hers, there in the middle of that floor, in front of every soul who had ever whispered about either of them, and stayed like that with his eyes shut while the light came down through the crystal in long splinters and fell across the both of them and made no distinction whatever between the grey stuff of her gown and the black silk of his coat. They were married at Ravensmere in the spring, in the small church with the rebuilt roof, with an old nurse crying in the front pew and Mr. Bramwell blowing his nose like a trumpet. The Ravensmere rents went to the Ravensmere tenants, as she had said they would. The great burned wing was pulled down and a school put up on the ground of it, and there is a plain grey stone in the wall of it with 2 names cut deep, Gerard and Hannah Danvers, and no other inscription, because their daughter said that anyone who needed to be told who they were had not known them. As for the Duke, the county waited a year for the old coldness to come back, and then it waited another, and at last it gave the matter up. He is still short with fools. He is still capable of a silence that empties a room, but there is a terrace at Doncaster Hall where a tall man walks every afternoon at 4 o'clock, in all weathers, with a dark-haired woman on his arm and her hand tucked warm inside his elbow, and they are usually arguing, and she is usually winning. And any groom in the yard will tell you that when she laughs, the Duke of Doncaster stops dead in the middle of the gravel and looks at her. He never says the word plain. He was cured of it, he says, in a single evening, in front of 300 people, at the cost of everything he thought he was. And it was, he says, and he says it with his hand over hers, by a very great distance, the best bargain ever struck in the history of his house.